So the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. It has wide-ranging ramifications for the United States, for American consumers. It has wide-ranging ramifications for the reshaping of global politics. Joining us on the line to discuss is Congressman August Pfluger. He's a new member of Congress from Texas. He represents the Permian Basin, the largest oil and gas-producing region in the nation. He was also a decorated fighter pilot flying F-22 fighter jets in the Air Force. He's a member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, one of only two Texans on the Homeland Security Committee. Congressman Pfluger, thanks so much for joining the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. Thanks for having me.
So first of all, what are you hearing about the situation on the ground in Ukraine? Obviously, the situation is incredibly fluid. Is it sort of a stagnated quagmire for the Russian military, or are they making significant gains? What do you think is the outlook here for the next few weeks?
Well, it's heartbreaking, first off, the atrocities that we see, the level that Putin will go to. I think everybody on the world stage now fully understands what most of us in the military have understood for a long time. He's willing to do whatever it takes. Doesn't matter about innocent civilians, doesn't matter about indiscriminate bombing. The situation that I see right now is that, yeah, it is a bit stagnated. I think nobody expected the Ukrainian military to perform like they have. They've done a great job behind the leader, behind their courageous leader, Zelensky. I mean, he really has emboldened them. But, you know, the thing about it is that you see Putin now leveling cities, and I think this is probably going to be his tactic of choice. I don't know that anything is going to stop him. He really is a madman right now. And this is a threat. What Zelensky told me when I was there 4 to 5 weeks ago, he said, this is a test for the West.
So, Congressman Pfluger, it looks like there's basically only a few options here on out in terms of where this goes. One is that this turns into a quagmire for the Russians. It stays that way for years on end, that even if they occupy, this turns into a very heavily fought military occupation for the next 10 to 20 years, that the sanctions continue, that Russia basically becomes more of a pariah on the world stage than it historically has been since the end of the Cold War. That's answer number one. Answer number two is some sort of negotiated solution where Putin is given an off-ramp. Say he keeps the Donbass region and Crimea, which he already militarily occupies, and then goes home. It's unclear if Putin will even take that deal. And then number three is, some sort of out-of-the-box possibility like his own military coup or something. That seems like the least likely scenario. Which one of those scenarios do you think is most likely to come down the pike here?
I think if we're looking at it right now, it probably is option one. I don't think that Zelensky is going to be happy giving the Donbass region. And the reason that I say that is because while discussing the situation 4 to 5 weeks ago with Zelensky in a congressional delegation, the question of what is a diplomatic off-ramp came up, and it was asked by a Democrat colleague. And Zelensky turned and he said, we're not a nation of lowest bidder contracts. Our borders matter. Our border security matters. We're going to fight for our borders. And I think that the people of Ukraine have tasted freedom now for 31 years. They love their country. Even the Russian-speaking Ukrainians love the country. So they're going to fight for it. And I think that's probably why I lean towards this kind of insurgency mindset, that it's very difficult for the Russian government and the Russian military to hold the territory there, that you're going to have a lot of insurgency-like activity within Ukraine from the Ukrainians.
And there have been some late-breaking reports from reporters like Alec Lund, who is a former Russia correspondent for The Guardian and The Telegraph, suggesting that Zelensky is cooling toward NATO and that he has seen NATO's refusal to implement a no-fly zone as sort of an excuse to say to the Russians, okay, fine, so we won't join NATO. You guys go back home. We'll put it in our constitution. Do you think that he's willing to make that sort of concession toward Russia, given that, again, he, I think, justifiably may feel, and the Ukrainians may justifiably feel, that after they gave up their nuclear weapons in 1994 and the West pledged to defend them, they really haven't done enough here?
It's a good point. He may very well be considering that. And I think it highlights a couple of things. Number one, it highlights how important deterrence is. We, as the United States, cannot be everywhere all at once. And nor is Zelensky asking us to put boots on the ground, but deterrence happens day in and day out. It doesn't happen after the fact. It certainly can't happen in the 11th hour, like a lot of people have suggested that it should have happened. But at this point, I think our focus right now is making sure that the Ukrainians get the lethal aid that they need. That includes combat air power from countries like Poland, Bulgaria, Romania that have former Soviet Union jets that the Ukrainian pilots know how to fly. It includes more Stingers, Javelins, the humanitarian aid that they need. And as we look forward, I think that now, the world has to reassess that deterrence. I mean, the real test here, Ben, is that China's watching. And this is a warm-up for what could be the same kind of situation in Taiwan. And that's just unacceptable. So we have to respond with a very bold, articulate statement, which includes fully sanctioning the energy sector, fully sanctioning the secondary and tertiary outlets that they have in their banking and finance sector, and making it very painful so that nobody will ever attempt this again.
We're speaking with Representative August Pfluger. He's a new member of Congress from Texas. So obviously you represent one of the most energy-rich areas in America. We are seeing gas prices spike to extraordinary highs, probably will hit unprecedented highs inside of the next couple of days. The highest energy prices we've ever seen were about $4.11 a gallon. That was back in 2008. We're already at like $4.07 a gallon, and those prices continue to spike. The Biden administration announced today that they are going to end importation of Russian oil and natural gas. But their solution to bring the prices down is not to ramp up production, which is what you would normally do in a war, right? In a war, if your enemy controls a supply and you wish to combat that, you ramp up your own production of the supply. We're not doing that. Apparently, we are now sending emissaries to Venezuela to get oil from Putin ally and dictator in his own right, Nicolas Maduro. None of this makes any sense unless you understand that the first priority of this administration is to kill the natural gas and oil industry, not to actually preserve the lifestyles of Americans and preserve their economic well-being.
Ben, you're absolutely right. And I've said this since I got elected, since I was sworn in, that energy security is national security. The president has a second, maybe a third chance right now, which is rare for a president to get. He needs to put Midland over Moscow. I represent Midland, Texas, the most prolific oil and gas producing region. And we've got plenty of other regions throughout the United States. And it is time to put our own domestic production to use, not only for our security, our needs, and what we can do domestically, but also for our partners and allies. And you're absolutely right to say that now the president is leaning on another dictator, another authoritarian regime. It's just unconscionable to think that we have the Russians in the middle of an Iranian nuclear deal, that we're going to be enriching the Iranians or the Venezuelans or the Chinese when we could be enriching ourselves here economically, but helping secure abroad our partners and allies.
So what exactly should we be doing, Representative Pfluger, about ramping up American oil production at this point? So we've seen that this administration has stalled out leases on federal lands and in the waters for oil. They've also obviously Keystone. They killed Keystone XL. There's an amazing exchange yesterday in which Jen Psaki said at the White House that she doesn't understand why opening Keystone XL or reopening methods of production would have any impact on oil prices more than getting Americans off oil entirely, which is total crazy talk. So what exactly could we be doing? What should we be doing to ramp up oil production at this point?
Well, you just mentioned it. It's absolutely unleashing all of the ability throughout the United States in any area, federal and public lands, offshore and onshore. It's getting rid of the weaponization of the regulatory agencies that have not certified pipelines, that will not certify our export terminals. I mean, we have such a great capacity here. The very first thing that the president did was kill the Keystone pipeline. That's 830,000 barrels a day of capacity that we could be using at our own refineries for domestic use and exporting. And so it's a number of things. And that's really what Midland over Moscow does, is it requires the administration to open up market access, not just around the world, but right here, and to come up with an energy security plan that literally puts Midland over the needs of Moscow, puts our domestic production ahead of that of our enemies. I mean, quite frankly, that's what we're talking about right now.
You know, Congressman Pfluger, there's so many problems with the Biden administration approach to world affairs. And when it comes to Ukraine, pretty much they've been leading from behind. They've just been following the Europeans, or they've been following private sector actors. But their broader global approach seems incredibly bizarre. As you mentioned, they're now reaching out to Venezuela, which barely has oil refining capacity as it is, because they've been nationalizing that oil industry and destroying it for the past 20 years. And they're reaching out to Venezuela to try and fill in the gaps created by the absence of Russian oil in the markets. Meanwhile, they're still negotiating with the Russians to try and revivify the dead Iran nuclear deal. They're literally using the Russians as a go-between at the same time that they're begging the Russians not to eviscerate Ukraine. None of this makes any sense on any sort of strategic level. It just seems like Biden is wildly vacillating one topic to another, but he can't get over his overall ideology, which seems to be green energy, not energy production. Countries are only bad because we make them bad. If only we treated them more nicely, things would be fine, even as he watches Putin invade Ukraine. It's just nonsensical.
It's nonsensical. Not only are they worshiping the climate gods in this religion that has literally led the world, I think, into this situation. I mean, without energy, without the Nord Stream pipeline, Putin didn't have the impetus nor the leverage to go into Ukraine. But you just look at this environment of weakness, and it started at our own borders. Ben, this is really important, that The rest of the world took a signal when Biden said, we're not going to deport anybody. We're not going to enforce our own laws at our southern border. Well, that's 2.1 million people in a year, rising crime, deaths by fentanyl. And then you go to Afghanistan and the foreign policy. People start looking at these things where we actually left. The Biden administration left Americans in Afghanistan. And now you fast forward to Ukraine. This environment of weakness, not only are our adversaries watching it, but our partners and our allies are looking at this, wondering about our resolve and our place of leadership. It took us so long to get here. We need to continue to be strong and lead. The president has an opportunity. What he needs to do is he needs to lay the law down and say, we're going to enforce our border security. He needs to call all the oil and gas companies throughout the United States and say, unleash your potential. Let's get back to dominance and let's provide for our own partners and allies, because we do it cleaner, more efficiently, and with higher labor standards than anywhere. But we know that that is highly unlikely to happen.
Well, that's Representative August Pfluger, a member of Congress from Texas. He is, again, on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and on the Homeland Security Committee. Representative Pfluger, thanks so much for your insight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben.